and welcome to another episode of Fire Facts with retired Fire Chief Paul Smith and the Marin Fire History Group. With me today is retired Division Chief from San Rafael, Brian Waterbury. And our topic for discussion today is the Terra Linda Fire Department. And Brian started as a volunteer with the Terra Linda Fire Department. And I'd like to welcome Chief Waterbury to our discussion this morning.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, it's an honor to be able to talk about the past and to talk about the history out in the Terra Linda Valley. I would imagine by now most of the people that lived out there when I did had probably moved on. And probably a lot of people out there really don't know the history of the Terra Linda Volunteer Fire Department.
Well, tell us a little bit about that, Brian, and how you got started then.
Yeah, interesting. Back in 1967. I was visiting a friend in Santa Venetia, and we saw a big column of smoke. Being teenagers, we said, "Let's go see what's going on." So we went over and saw this house that was on fire out there in Santa Venetia, and there was no fire department. There was no firefighters. What we saw was neighbors kind of running into the house and taking furniture out. So on my way home in Terra Linda, I lived up on Patricia Way at the upper end of Terra Linda. I stopped by the Terra Linda Volunteer Fire Department, knocked on the door, and Chief George Walser answered. And I said, "Gee, is there a shortage of firefighters? I was just over in San Venetia, and no fire engine showed up." And he said, "Well," he says, "no, there isn't a shortage," but he was starting to explain to me the different organizations and what their lines of demarcation were. And then he said, "Do you want to be a volunteer firefighter here in Terra Linda?" And I hadn't even thought about it. And I said, "Well, yeah, tell me a little more." So he invited me into his office. We sat down, and I walked out with turnouts, and kind of like, "Okay, now what do I do?" And he said, "We'll show up on Thursday night. We have our drill every Thursday night."
Yeah,
I did, and that was July 1st of 1967. I was only 16 years old. You were supposed to be 17 to get in, but my birthday was in 2 weeks, July 18th. So the chief said, "Just come on in." 4 days later, I'm running up the hills in Terra Linda facing wildfire.
Wow. That was your first experience as a volunteer firefighter?
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I mean, it was like, whoa, right away. They told us, we in Terra Linda, we didn't have any high pressure hose lines, but it was a regular reel line, red line. And it was like, "Okay, take this and run up the hill and see if you can put that fire out." So,
and Chief, what were you wearing? Blue jeans and a pair of boots?
yeah, we did. We had blue jeans. We didn't have wildland gear then, so it was either going to put on your structural firefighting gear or, just show up in t-shirts and whatever you had. But that was kind of standard operating procedure then. Structure fires, obviously, in full protective gear, including breathing apparatus, but the wildland fire was kind of like, don't get burned.
And in the 60s, Terra Linda was a lot more flashy fuels and grass than than some of the brush that's up in the hills now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, back in the 60s, now remember that whole Terra Linda Valley was it was full of cows,
Yeah,
and it was part of dairy, Lucas Valley Dairy,
right.
and so there were always cattle grazing up in the hills, which did keep the field down.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Now transitioning as a volunteer there, how long were you a volunteer with Terra Linda Fire? And maybe talk just a little bit about the fire department and its beginnings and how it started as a community service agency.
yeah, I don't know the exact date that it started, but Terra Linda really started to develop in the 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
mid to late 1950s. And of course, the Eichler homes, Eichler, Kenny, and Alliance were the three big developers in there. And the Eichler homes were a little different structure than people were used to. It was more open, had more glass, and they had a structure fire. And at the time, because it was a community services district, it wasn't part of the city of San Rafael. It was covered by the county fire department, and the nearest county fire engine was actually over in Santa Venetia. And this Eichler home caught fire, and as we all know, Eichler homes tend to burn to the ground within about 10 minutes because of the way that they're constructed.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that took the county unit 7 minutes to get there, and basically the unit that they sent was overwhelmed. I think there was one firefighter on it. So people in the community, the people in Terra Linda said, we've got to do better than that. So they formed a community services district.
Okay.
And within that, they created their own fire department, a volunteer fire department. So the way the public safety worked was that the sheriff's office was in charge of law enforcement,
Okay.
and the volunteer fire department obviously did all the structure fire and the medical calls.
Okay. Let me ask you. So at that time, Terra Linda was totally unincorporated then.
It totally was. Yeah, it's interesting if you look at a map when you come off the freeway
Mm-hmm.
into Terra Linda, you were in the city of San Rafael, almost down to the Los Raposos, and then you got into the CSD,
Okay.
and further up in Terra Linda, which was undeveloped when I moved there, was still in the city of Santa Fe. So literally to get to the far end of Terra Linda,
Okay.
upper end, you had to go through city of Santa Fe city limits.
Okay. So let me ask you, today where Scotty's Market is and San Rafael Fire Station 56 is today, that was the heart of Terra Linda volunteer fire area then.
Yeah, that is correct.
And did San Rafael annex the or provide service at where 56 is today? Was that the same location of the Terra Linda Fire Department back in your day?
Yeah, it's the same location.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
The original fire station was really built by Eichler to store wood, and so it was like a garage.
oh, okay. Okay. And
And
so there was a garage and an office, but that you didn't have a paid staff back then, or did they have a paid staff?
No paid staff.
Okay.
The fire chief was Chief Flaherty, and he owned the mobile station, which was right there, still there. It's different name now. And the fire calls didn't have 911 then, but if you called in a fire or medical emergency, it went directly to his house,
Oh, his home. All right.
his home, and
And he responded, went across the street to the fire station to jump in the rig. Then is that how it worked?
yeah, with the way they had it, there was a large telephone pole with a World War II air raid siren on it, and that could be triggered by Marin County Communications.
Okay.
So Paul would come in either to Chief Flaherty, Richard Flaherty, or somebody at Marin Communications would get it, and they would Marin Communications could trigger that siren, and then
Okay.
what they did was they actually had a like a chalkboard out in front, and they whoever took the call would write down the address. So
Okay.
as the volunteers came in, they could see where the address was, and then they could drive up to wherever the fire was. If they didn't go and just see the smoke.
Right. So they would respond with their turnouts in their personal vehicle if the engine had already left.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, interesting times. Interesting times.
Yeah. I remember back in like 1961 when we first moved there. We lived over on Monticello, and I remember at night waking up and it's real quiet except for you hear this air raid siren going off. And it was kind of eerie.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized that it was the fire department calling in the volunteers.
Okay.
And in those days, almost all your shop owners, the minister of the First Presbyterian Church there in Terra Linda, they were all members of the volunteer fire department.
Okay. That's a good segue into my next question. You worked with a lot of, probably a couple of dozen volunteers in Terra Linda Fire. And a number of those folks went on to professional careers when Terra Linda transitioned to San Rafael Fire Department. So do you remember some of those folks that were volunteers with you in Terra Linda, Brian?
Yeah, I sure do. There was we actually were very fortunate because we had a really vibrant volunteer force, and a number of our volunteers went on to have fire service careers, and a couple of them, Ed Mestry,
Okay.
went on to be a chief officer, County Marin. Let's see, Jim Alvarado went on to be a firefighter in San Rafael. Mark Worthen went on to be a firefighter in San Rafael. Gary Vetter went to be a firefighter in Nevada.
Okay.
Both the Angeli brothers, Mike and Hank Angeli, were both. Mike was a division chief, my counterpart in San Rafael. Mike Angeli, and Hank Angeli was, I think he was assistant chief over in the Chevron Fire Department.
Okay.
There were a couple of others. There was one young man I know who went on to be the fire chief down in Southern Marin somewhere, and then left there, and I think he was became the fire marshal up in Sonoma County.
Okay. So just off the top of your head there, you named 8 or 10 folks, not include, you forgot to mention yourself, modest as you are. You went on to a a significant career in San Rafael and retired as a division chief.
Yeah, I was very blessed, I got into this career field really kind of not knowing what to expect. I mean, I have no legacy in my family of anybody in the fire department, but it was truly my passion. I didn't realize that, until actually that first fire, and I went, okay, yeah, I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I rose to the rank of captain in the Terra Linda Volunteer Fire Department, and then I was part-time paid. So every once in a while, I'd be the paid guy on duty for 24 hours. When the CSD incorporated into the city of San Rafael, obviously the volunteer fire department went away. It was a really sad day for all of us. We had to turn our turnout gear in to strange firefighters that were now stationed in our fire station, which were the San Rafael firefighters. But Chief Marcucci came up with a great idea. Came up with what he called a student dispatcher program. And it was, at the time, dispatching for San Rafael was the secretary dispatched during the day, answered the phones, dispatched during the day, Juanita McGuire, bless her soul. At night, it was usually the rookie firefighter that had to answer the hotline. We call it the hotline. So what Chief Marcucci, always forward thinking, I mean, he really, I can't say enough about Chief Bob Marcucci. He came up with this program. Let's see if we can use these volunteers while they're going to College of Marin in the fire science program. And so I applied and I got accepted, and I became a dispatcher for the City of San Rafael Fire Department. Worked in the evenings, slept on a cot, at night, but was able to do homework in between the calls. And the next morning, I was relieved by Juanita McGuire. And on the weekends, I would pull a 24-hour duty, and on holidays.
Cool. Now, I've got to ask you, very enthusiastic about your career, but we like to ask this of some of our guests. If you were 20-something years old again, would you do it over?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I probably would have lied about my age and gotten in even earlier. I mean, talk about being blessed. I don't know about the rest of the firefighters, but for me, it was like a calling. And the only thing I can really relate it to is if you ask a priest, why did you become a priest? And most of them go, it's just a calling, And boy, for me, it definitely was a calling. And how great a career that I can serve in the community that I grew up in, right? I mean, I'm not commuting to San Francisco and all that traffic. I'm right here sharing all the information that I'm learning with the community members.
Sure. Well, I'd like to thank retired Chief Brian Waterbury today for joining us here at Marin Fire History. I hope you've enjoyed this little piece we've done on the history of the Terra Linda Fire Department. Very interesting beginnings, and now Terra Linda, everybody today just assumes it's a community in northern San Rafael, but it had its own identity back in the 1950s and 60s. So from Marin Fire History, we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today, and have a good day.